Okay, all right, well then we will get started today. And of course, this is our last session working through the 7-week hybrid. And like I mentioned before, it's really andragogy since 2/3 of our students are, normal college students and or all the way up through adults, although the pedagogy could apply to any dual enrollment instructors that we have. And so this will be our last session. And this session will start out by focusing on the one topic that we did not hit earlier. So I would encourage you, depending on what we're able to cover this session, to go back and watch the videos of the previous sessions if you want to learn more, if there are any topics that we don't cover today. So just for sake of a quick agenda, after a very brief background, then I will go through the one topic that we have not covered. And if there's remaining time, of course, then I will let the participants choose what topics we get to cover after that in true hybrid fashion. And of course, we'll talk about how to continue the conversation, even though our workshop is ending, how we can continue this work to continue to better serve our students. And so, as I came to Chattanooga State last year, they told me that I would be teaching on the 7-week format. And so that was really the focus of my transition here, was learning how to teach accelerated courses. But I did not realize, it just wasn't front of mind, that I was teaching not only 7-week courses, but I was also teaching hybrid courses. And so that was kind of the missing piece that this year I really tried to dive into to examine what do I need to do as a hybrid instructor to best leverage that course format, in addition to a 7-week class. How can I get the most out of this specialized format for the good of my students and myself? Of course, I'm a learner with them. And so the two primary influences that I drew upon for this work, in addition to a lot of research articles, which I'll share at the end, you can have a link to access all of the references, including these and the other articles. But the first one, How to Design and Teach a Hybrid Course by Dr. Jay Caulfield. In this work, she is very practical. Like I mentioned earlier, she is considered an expert in the hybrid format. She comes from a nursing background and then now currently in an educational setting. So she really gives practical suggestions on what the hybrid course is, how to best implement it, and we walked through some of the strategies in the first session. And so a lot of them came from her work. And then, of course, as far as a institution-wide transformation, this book, Student-Centered Pedagogy and Course Transformation at Scale by Chantel Levis Bristol, is just fascinating because at Purdue University, they instituted the Impact program, which was foundational in redesigning a lot of their courses. And so using both of these two works, I have leaned heavily on them and the other research articles to really put together this workshop series to help inform us as we each want to be better teachers in the hybrid format. So this is the part of the workshop where the participants typically get to choose. However, since, and just for your information, the very first one that was selected by the participants was strategies. So in session 1, we covered strategies. In session 2, we covered tools. We did a participant idea exchange, and then we looked at chat state data, and then finally theoretical approaches. So this session, we will cover the definition and advantages first, see how long that takes us, and then, of course, I'll kick it back to the participants here today to let them decide what we would like to cover with our remaining time. So we will dive right in to the definition and advantages. So as we look at a hybrid course, it is definitionally that combination of two different learning spaces that we've been talking about this whole workshop. We've got, and traditionally it is a face-to-face combined with an online, although in the literature, there are instances where it might be two different learning spaces, such as a face-to-face paired with a work experience. Maybe your student teaching could be considered a hybrid class because the students are out in the field getting that experience, and then they're coming back to a seminar class, and that could be labeled as hybrid. But for the most part, when you see hybrid in the literature, it will refer to face-to-face and online. That's the most dominant format for this. And so we'll also come across a number of different labels, and it's important to recognize those so that as we go forward in the study, and we talked about using published research as one of our tools for continuing the conversation and learning about this, it's important to note that not all people will say hybrid when they mean this combination of face-to-face learning and online learning. And so you'll also see it labeled as mixed mode. Pandy and Panda, and Selno and Richmond and others use that label, and that makes sense to me. A mix of modes, in my mind, makes sense as a label. Blended classroom, or also blended learning, and even Caulfield in her book labels it as that. And I like that because in my mind, blending something is very positive. It, to me, connotates pulling strengths from both. And so I think that's a nice label. And then this one's also really interesting to me. In Pandy and Panda, we see technology mediated, which directly implies that that second classroom experience is going to be online if you're labeling it technology mediated. This one wasn't as prevalent in the literature, but was used, and that one specifically combines the online learning space. So when does the hybrid course start to become a thing? So this was fascinating to me because if I'm just thinking through and I'm acknowledging online learning, then I don't go back as far as 1960s. But the Pandy and Panda article insists that the origins start as early as 1960s. I tried to dive deeper to see what it would look like. What does hybrid look like in the 60s? And unfortunately, it was too vague. So I'm interested to learn more. If any of my colleagues ever, have heard of it from that era and could share their experiences, I think that would be fascinating because unfortunately, they did not go into detail, but they did say as early as the 1960s. So it's still relatively new. It hasn't been around forever. And I think that's exciting because that means we can continue to adapt and innovate in this area of hybrid learning. And then, of course, we know that it became really popular through the pandemic. And it was really that online space that we had to use during the pandemic that I think kind of opened up a lot of people's minds that maybe had not tried hybrid before, or especially had not tried online education, but through the pandemic experience saw some possibilities in that realm. And so since the pandemic, in the literature, we've seen an uptake in the popularity of the hybrid course. And of course, it continues to be popular today. And there's no acknowledgement of any decrease in popularity because we continue to have access to online learning spaces, and those are constantly evolving and changing. And of course, we know that face-to-face is valuable. That's the piece, I think, in the pandemic that we maybe saw a greater appreciation for. As you were behind your screen all day, every day with your students, you may have yearned for that face-to-face, and yet you probably saw some advantages to the online sphere as well. So the hybrid allows us to combine both of those. So before we talk about those advantages, let's look at what we use locally. So our TBR website, in the data that I brought forward in the last session, where we looked at hybrid learning in policy brief number 4, you can see right down here, well, maybe you can't because it's really small, but the label for the instructional method is hybrid for TBR, and it defines it as courses that combine in-person instruction with online remote delivery as defined by each college. So there is a definition and then there's some leeway, and that's what we saw in the literature. This combination of online plus in-person, yet not a specific formula for how much in-person and how much online. So there's still some leeway, which gives academic freedom to your instructors as they design their their hybrid course. So let's roll right into those advantages. And so I've tried to break these down into, I believe, 6 of the advantages that stuck out to me in my research, and these will be combined from a variety of sources. So as an open access college at Chat State, we definitely want to increase access to education, and the hybrid course allows for that. It's very, very life friendly. We have students who are busy, they might have families, they might have Good morning. They might have responsibilities, they might have jobs. And so increasing access to education through a life-friendly format is recognized in a study by Baker and others, Caulfield and DeZubian and others. Another component of increased access is the idea that it promotes lifelong learning. You don't have to quit your job to come to school, 8 to 5 as a traditional college student, because now we have hybrid courses where they can meet online for a portion of the time. They can meet in person for a portion of the time, maybe on your lunch break. You can come attend some of the class, and then you continue that learning in the online space. So it's very life-friendly, as noted by Lou and Tortolet in 2011. And also, as far as increasing access, it is better than online only for some of our students. Some of our students we've recognized really struggle with an all online course. And so this is kind of a happy medium. It's where they have some face-to-face instructor and peer interaction, and yet they have some flexibility as well, which leads me to my next advantage as flexibility. So this was noted in the research by Baker et al. And Lou and Turtelate because of the diverse learning spaces. And that was mentioned in the articles by Luton and Dawes in 2022. Students have more than one learning space, which approaches the advantage of those multiple intelligences that we talked about, that Howard Gardner reminds us that we all have multiple intelligences and different ways to learn. And so if you have...
Sorry.
If you have those different learning spaces, then that really allows your learners more independence. They also have more access to the course in a hybrid space. They have access in person. They have access high flex. If you like William are like, hey, I'm going to be in person, but I also want to join online because I can have more access to other learners and the information. So it truly has the most flexibility. And then, you have this rich online environment that you're utilizing and leveraging in between physical meeting times. Let's see. Can you think of a disadvantage to the flexibility of a hybrid course?
There's less consistent accountability.
Okay, that's so I said students can struggle with time management. Okay, this is consistent with the research by Unger and others in 2022. And that's one piece where some of our online students have really struggled because they have some deadlines, but they don't have a structured time to sit down, to meet, to do the study. And so while we say, yes, the hybrid course is really flexible, that also acknowledges that students have the ability to be responsible to get their work done in the online space, right? So this flexibility, while we love it, it could be a disadvantage for some students, which is why we talked about in our strategies, you've got to over communicate to our students. This is what a hybrid course is. This is what it looks like. These are the expectations. And these are how to be successful in taking the course because students can sometimes struggle with time management, as we know. Sometimes we struggle with time management too. Let's look at another advantage of using technology. So as we know, helping our students learn to use technology prepares them for their future career. This is consistent with the research done by Dr. Caulfield in her book, and this technology uses reflects the real world. Our students are going to go get jobs where they're expected to be proficient in technology, including online learning spaces. And so that's what DeZubian and others published in their report in 2018. And also with this technology, we can embed employability through digital literacy. And that's what the report by Bennett and others in 2020 came up with. Also, technology allows us continuous collaboration, whether it's in person and online simultaneously, or we leave the classroom and we continue the learning in the online space. There's no interruption because of this continuous collaboration through the technology space. And Bennett and others talked about that. Also, it can, as Allen in his study published in 2020, it can increase student interest in your course when you're leveraging both spaces. The students can feel more engaged. Can you think of a disadvantage that technology youth brings to the hybrid course?
I kind of wonder about, I think a lot of students nowadays are used to like cell phones and typing on their cell phones versus a laptop or computer. So I don't know if that's something that could be a hindrance in the use of technology.
I know I have seen students come in and with their cell phone and they look up our D2L course and they want to see, oh, where was that Dropbox? And not only is it hard for them, but it's equally hard for me to try to find the Dropbox on their phone. So yes, I would say students trying to go through college with a cell phone instead of, hopefully they have a desktop, but what do you think, William? Have you had students working on their phone?
Yes, and they can, it's just not big enough. They can't find things as easily as if it were on a computer or a laptop. And some of them don't have it. Like they don't have it at home either. They'll be at
Well,
work or.
And that's why I think, yes, the technology piece could be super difficult for them because if I'm teaching my in-person course in a computer lab, they've got access to a computer there, but that's for an hour and 15 minutes. And, then they've got access in the library if they choose to use the library. But if I'm expecting them to do online work from their cell phone, and I can usually tell on a discussion board if someone has typed on their cell phone versus if they have typed with their fingers, because it's usually text speak on their phone. It's really evident to me. Can you tell, William?
Well, and one thing that happened recently is somebody was trying to find something and we couldn't, but somebody else who had a phone came over and said, oh, this is how you find it. So then I learned as well as the person who had the phone. It still was cumbersome,
Yes.
but we all were learning together.
And it's nice to know that it's possible because laptops break. I've had a number of students, oh, my laptop's broken. I can't afford a new one yet. And I know on our campus, they can't check them out through the library. So I think, yes, Dr. Pipes, what has been your experience with technology?
It's currently fine in our program, but yeah, the cell phone is a really interesting, that's fascinating about that you get a different style of writing depending on what device they're writing from. I guess that just is habit for them.
And it's hard for them to see it on their cell phone. So I don't think they do as good a job proofreading.
Yeah.
Then they can see it and they can see the red lines and, fix their grammar errors. Occasionally I will even have students do their work on, especially in my high schools, do their work on the cell phone and screenshot it and upload it into Dropboxes and things like that. So, yes. Okay, any other disadvantages to using technology?
I would just say unfamiliarity with certain programs or because e-learn is not necessarily user-friendly.
Right?
There's a sharp learning curve, I think, with some of our D2L platforms.
Yeah, I would echo that. Because the hybrid course is very reliant on technology, then we have to assume the role of technology instructor at the beginning to make sure the students have access, understand, how to run a discussion board, how to access the Teams if we're using Teams, whatever our platforms are. Then the sad fact is that another disadvantage of technology is that it can fail. We had a storm this morning. Did that lock students out of technology opportunities if they lost power? And so that's another consideration that I think as instructors we have to be aware of when power goes out, when we have these big storms, or just that our students may come from areas that don't have consistent internet. And so being aware of that if that's what we're relying on for half of our classroom space.
I had a student fail last semester for that very reason. They lived on a farm just very far away. And she said, I can't do anything if I'm not on campus. Or if she could go to someone else's house that was the next farm over, but it was a very long, like she just couldn't make it. She couldn't keep up.
I've had that excuse, and I say excuse, I'm not saying that it wasn't valid, but even with my high school students, they have technology at school, but which I know we've got grants and they should be able to get access, but some of them struggle with consistent living structures. So, internet's probably low on their hierarchy of needs. So yeah, understanding that in a hybrid course, you're at more of a loss when you have lack of technology or technology issues. And of course, that can also impact instructors. And so that's something that I have to keep in mind as I travel and I teach on the hybrid. Am I going to be able to have internet access traveling? Because as I design my hybrid course, a lot of my online class functions over the weekend, when I, typically might travel, and I have to take that into consideration, make sure where I'm going will have internet so that I can be present in the online space. Another advantage is more human interaction. And this is when we compare the hybrid course to the online only. So a lot of our students might be coming to our course, to the hybrid format, looking for more human interactions. And this is it really helps students because online only students, as reported by Baker and others in 2020 and Pandy and Panda in 2023, can feel isolated. And so you've got the online student, they're taking classes at Chat State, but they're never on campus. So they're not able to participate in our celebrations on campus and our workshops, and they can't see other students walk by and walk to class, and they can't sit in a room, they can't see their instructor. And so the hybrid class helps alleviate any isolation that they might find, and helps to build community just because we have human interaction. And so it also helps improve instructor immediacy. This was something that was highlighted in our opening session this spring, and the importance of instructor immediacy in the classroom. And so that's something that we have to really fight for in an online environment. In a hybrid course, you have that instructor immediacy because we're all going to be together live, whether it's live live online or live in person. We're going to have that space in the hybrid learning. And so that is consistent. But what might be a disadvantage to more human interactions? No, I know this one is tricky. I thought of one that could be a possible disadvantage, but I think it comes from my subject area.
I'm thinking of, we kind of mentioned this in your first session, but there might be students who are shy to speak up. Like that was me in speech class. I was so afraid of, sharing. So maybe there's students like that, they feel more comfortable online and being able to speak up a little bit more.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. In our COM 2025 classes, we have seen just a raise in the demand for our online classes. And I believe it is because of students with high social anxiety. And a lot of them will be verbal or, written. They'll express that at the outset, that they're really appreciative of this online environment because they deal with a lot of social anxiety. And so while we're saying, oh, this is great, the hybrid gives us this, for some students, this might be a drawback, and this might be something that creates more social anxiety for them. So that could possibly be perceived by students as a disadvantage of the hybrid format. All right, number 5, it improves communication skills. And it's funny that I put this one right after talking about a possible disadvantage. But we know that communication skills are important. It's been studied in the literature, especially with our industry partners. And we heard that emphasized in the opening session 2 years ago, my first one. All of our industry partners that spoke in plenary week emphasized communication as a soft skill that they need in their employees. And so a study by Brockelman, Post, and Pyle in 2017 talked about how students taking a hybrid class and in-person experience really helped to lessen their public speaking skills, which I know has mainly to do with my course, but I know my course is not the only course that has students get up and give presentations. And so we can see that they might be able to do this with less public speaking anxiety in a hybrid experience because they are meeting in person and they are talking to students face-to-face and instructors. It also, according to the same study, improves their self-perceived communication competence, which I think is a benefit to all of us. And if you are only online as a student, then you might be able to start to struggle with some of your communication skills just because they're out of practice, and so doing the hybrid course gives you that opportunity to speak to your classmates in person, to speak to your instructor in person, as well as online. And then our last one, the last benefit is that students actually say, oh, I've got two more, sorry, there's 7. Students actually perceive benefits, but these two are very closely related. There's been reports of greater course engagement and also higher test scores in a study by Allen in 2020, and Zubian and others in 2018 reported student success in the hybrid course, and also that students preferred hybrid when they were surveyed. And I think that our students voice their approval by enrolling in the courses, and where you see, okay, my hybrid course is feeling compared to my online course or my full face-to-face, you can start to see trends based on student preference. Every time that I teach a hybrid course, the students that choose that course talk so highly about, oh, we're so glad this was an option. We love the formatting. We love the fact that it's a blended space. So I'm hearing positive feedback from my students. And so that inspires me to want to get the most benefit out of the hybrid structure and be able to utilize it to its full potential. Any student feedback from you all? Yes, William.
The student that you brought to me last week,
Oh, yes, yes.
he's an online student.
Okay.
He showed up to my class this morning.
Because you offered it to
I
him.
did. I said, if you ever want to come by, you're more than welcome. And sure enough, he showed up this morning. He was so glad to have, because he never really wanted an online class because he's a second language learner. And he was very glad to be there and to get the handouts that I give my students and that kind of thing. So I was so glad to see him. So I can attest to the fact that, and I may be shooting myself in the foot, is to send to my online students, hey, if you ever want to have the class, but then I may have 35 students on that.
I don't think you will. I've done that before.
Okay.
And I've had 1 or 2, here and there, who, like you, said, I didn't want this online class, but everything else was full. And so acknowledging, so what you did was you created a personal hybrid course for this student. Come to my, so he'll still have to do all the online assignments with your other class, but he gets the benefit that we've talked about more human interaction, flexibility, increased access. So I think it's wonderful.
He's gonna come once a week, he says, because he's off alternating Mondays and Wednesdays, which is when my class is.
Which talks about the flexibility
Sure.
component. So I think where we can't do that for all of our students, say come whenever you want, if they're holding a but you have space in your room, I'm assuming, and so if he comes in, it's not an issue, and that increases his access to education. I think he'll be more successful.
I'm sure he will be, because he just will be, because he was, wanting to do that and said, I'm gonna be back. And I did give out a handout. They have a midterm exam, the people that are on ground. So I gave it to him, and I took up everybody else's, and he says, well, I'm not finished. Can I take it home? I go, yeah, just take it with you. And
That's
then,
awesome.
and bring it back to me whenever you want, or don't.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to start to study how many of our students are not getting their modality choice. I really want hybrid, but they're all full. I'm, forced into online, but I'm not a good candidate. Or, I'm signing up for in-person because I don't even know there are 2 other options. So I think that would be really fascinating to have as a conversation. And I don't know how we would access that information unless we just surveyed our students. How many of, which informally, I say, how many of you knew that you signed up for this hybrid course the first day? And they're like, what is hybrid? So that's been my experience. They just knew it had a meeting time, but they had no idea of what made it hybrid. So, but I wonder how many of our students are prohibited from that because they're
What would work for students, because I have students that come from Dayton and Cleveland.
Mhm.
And sometimes they don't want to drive here.
Yeah.
And I have, don't tell anybody. I've given them the option of, like, if you're good and you're doing well, then you don't have to drive in to do that. And so they kind of just come when they feel like, I need to come in and see somebody. So I have given the option of people that are supposed to be on ground
to make it more.
I'm not driving,
Yeah.
Really?
Well, and even if you start rolling the high flex, then, they could just, I will save gas, but I'll just tune in and so I won't be missing. So then they don't even have to make a choice of am I okay or should I drive in, because traffic in Chattanooga is a whole nother, even if they want to spend the gas, do they want to sit on the interstate for a while?
I have a student that drives an hour and a half.
It's incredible.
He told me today, he said, yeah, I drive an hour and a half and this is my only class. And I said, well, we may be able to make some arrangements. Like if you come in on the days when I'm introducing new material
Right.
and you're okay. But he says, no, I'm the kind of person that needs in person and I need to hear from you. And I said, well, okay, but just let me know if you're ever,
That's a long drive.
that's like from here to Atlanta.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
But you can see perceived benefit, he says, no, I need to be
Right.
in person. So that only speaks to the power of the setup that you've got. And so closely related to that, the instructors perceive benefits when teaching in this modality. Pandy and Panda in their report said that instructors noted that it took less time to set up their online class and teach their online class. However, others, including Dr. Caulfield and Kegley et al. In their study in 2016, say that it takes more work. So there are varying perceptions. For me, it takes a lot of prep work initially to redesign the course and get it the way I want it to be. And then it does take some intentionality in the weekend, throughout, to check in on the online space, because sometimes we can forget about it, right? So you have to be, okay, I'm getting on the board. And I personally, when I get on the board, I want my students to know that I've been on the board. So I will leave comments here or there so they can see me, because I don't think they'll trust me if I just say, yeah, I read what you all read. But that is the third piece of it, is when we come back to class the next week, then I talk about what happened online, so that it's reinforced. Oh, yes, we did, because inevitably we will have students who do not go online and do what they're supposed to do. So reinforcing the fact that it's a continuous learning environment, whether the learning space shifts from time to time, but we're all carrying through with the learning. So yes, I see enough benefit to outweigh the component of will it take more work or less work, because I believe in the power that it brings. And for all the other benefits, I think if it does take me a little bit more time, that's okay, because I think it's worth it. So it's interesting to me, and I would love to survey everybody here. Do you think the hybrid takes more time as an instructor or less time? I think that would be a fascinating conversation to have with instructors. And those that say it takes less time, then I think they would have little tips and tricks, that we've been talking about to share. And of course, I would also assume that the more I teach on hybrid, the more proficient I will become, and that might translate to more efficiency as well. So any thoughts on instructor perspective of the hybrid course? Dr. Pipes, what do you think about it?
The time is really interesting. You've got me thinking really hard, because I know when I was teaching just strictly a 100% online class, it took so much time to set up, so much investment at the beginning, but then I was always tweaking something, but it was definitely a lot less time once it got going. But also, just like you said, it takes a little bit of like reminding yourself to stay
It's out
engaged
there.
with it.
Mhm.
And not just grade things as they come in, but be proactive about making your presence known.
Yes.
So that's interesting.
And the other thing, as far as an instructor benefit, when I compare my hybrid class to my online class, I know my students better that are hybrid. And it's not for lack of effort. I keep a list of all my students and I write down little things I learn about my online students. And so I try to, when I'm grading, I'm this person is majoring in this and this person's on the baseball team. And I try, but it's a lot of effort, because I don't even know what they look like unless they've shared a picture of themselves. So my hybrid students, I meet face to face, and so I see them. And so the memory component is just so automatic. And I know their names, and I know that, I remember things a lot easier, and I don't struggle to know my students like I do in my online class. And of course, like you mentioned, like you have to be really intentional, because you'll forget that you're even teaching an online class. Like, how is that possible? But we get so busy as instructors that you can't forget about your hybrid class. because they're there at 9 a.m. waiting for you. It's 9:30 to get there. So they're unforgettable, truly. All right, what's our time? Oh, and that's okay. So we don't get to go back because we're out of time. So as you can see, we have now successfully covered all of the 6 topics that I had planned for. And I was a little bit worried after our first session, and even this session, it took the whole time to cover definition and advantages. But if we go back to the end, I don't think this has to be the end of our learning, of our conversations. We're, like Chad mentioned, we have recorded these so that instructors can watch these sessions later. And then as we bump into each other, as we continually want to grow as instructors, we share those ideas that we're using, trying out, disaster. I did away with a terrible idea recently that just bombed. But that's how we grow as instructors. That's how we learn what can work, what is possible in the hybrid format, and what is a less than good idea. So I think, this, for me, this is only the beginning. I'm going to continue working on my hybrid course and getting better at that format. And so to just encourage everybody to keep growing and keep sharing. And I think that's how we can move forward. And of course, find the other hybrid instructors on our campus and see what they're doing well and how they're growing in their hybrid course, Andragogy, as well. Thanks, everybody.